Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this morning with Sigmund Karterud and Giovanna Esposito. The title of this webinar is Mentalization-Based Group Therapy, MBT-G, Theory, Clinical Application, Research. Few words about Sigmund Karterud biography and Giovanna, and some words about their collaboration. Sigmund Karterud is professor of psychiatry, formerly, I'm sorry, could you please mute all the microphones because there's an echo. I can talk very well. Okay. Sigmund Karterud is professor of psychiatry, formerly at University of Oslo, and founder of the Department for Personality Psychiatry at the Oslo University Hospital. The state-funded Norwegian Competence Center for Personality Psychiatry, and also the Norwegian Treatment Network for Personality Disorders. Sigmund is a training group analyst at Institute of Group Analysis, Oslo, and founding president of the Norwegian Group Psychotherapy Association. His background includes psychoanalysis, self-psychology, and for the last 15 years, MBT. He has published around 200 scientific papers and around 15 books, whereof the most relevant for the current webinar is, of course, mentalization-based group therapy for the Oxford University Press in 2015. Well, Giovanna Esposito is our colleague and friend. She's a PhD psychologist. She's in the board of SPR Italy area group. She's a systemic relational psychotherapist and researcher in clinical psychology at the Department of Humanities at the University of Naples, Federico II. Her main research interests are the process analysis in group interventions, the treatment integrity to the mentalizing model, the therapy style, the academic engagement of university students, and the computerized methods for text analysis. Well, why Sigmund and Giovanna today? Because the collaborative relationship that brings together Sigmund and Giovanna stands on the basis of their reciprocal interest on MBT-G and treatment integrity to the mentalizing model in different group interventions. More in detail, they collaborated for adapting the MBT-G principles to some counseling groups addressed to underachieving university students and aimed to promote the members' reflective functioning. Their research network started in 2016, right after the publication of the MBT-G manual, and prolifically proceeds through the years, resulting in many publications, in particular two papers published on the topic of MBT-G. They are titled, one published in 2019, and the title is Mentalizing Underachievement in Group Counseling, Analyzing the Relationship Between Members' Reflective Functioning and Counselors' Intervention. And the second one is more recent, is 2020, with the title Treatment Integrity and Members' Change in Group Counseling, a pilot study on counselors' mentalizing interventions. Their current research also regards the phenomenology of pseudo-mentalizing in group therapy and the challenges that this non-mentalizing mode poses to MBT group therapists. And this topic will be also discussed during the webinar, the workshop of the present webinar. We decided to use only the English language for this webinar, in particular because we have also international guests. So if someone from the Italian audience doesn't get something from the talks of Sigmund and Giovanna, they have just to write a message on the chat, and Giovanna will focus on that message, and she will summarize in Italian maybe something that you didn't get from the talk. But I'm sure that both Sigmund and Giovanna will talk slowly, so everyone could get their interesting comments and research on the mentalization-based treatment for groups. So I'm very, very glad to be in particular today to be the president of the SPR Italy area group, because I'm very proud to start to introduce this workshop. And so please enjoy the Sigmund presentation and all the very interesting program we will have to follow today. So please, Giovanna, and have a very productive and stimulating morning of work.
Thank you, Vittorio. Thank you for this introduction. And on my side too, thank you very much to Professor Karterud, to Sigmund, to have kindly accepted to attend today this webinar on mentalization-based group therapy. And now I want to give some information to the participants about the main contents that we'll be discussing during the webinar, and on how the webinar has been organized, and then finally some organizing information about materials that we will use during the webinar. At first, in a few minutes, we will start with the keynote, because the webinar is divided into two parts. There will be a keynote by Sigmund Karterud on the theoretical foundations of mentalization-based group therapy, and on clinical implications of MBT-G for persons with severe personality disorders. Sigmund will start his keynote by discussing Bion's conceptualization on group dynamics and group basic assumptions, and then he will move to discuss from a mentalizing perspective the challenges that persons with personality disorders often pose to the group therapist. Then he will explain us how the MBT-G principles were developed, and also illustrated some MBT-G programs implemented in Norway. He will then discuss a very important concept in the field of psychotherapy research, namely treatment integrity, specifically treatment integrity to the mentalizing model. And as he will explain us, this is a very important concept nowadays, mostly ignored in the past in the field of psychotherapy research, but it's so important because it allows us to respond to an important question, namely if the therapist is on the model. And now it has to be considered a must that cannot be ignored by psychotherapists and by researchers. Then he will introduce a new rating scale for measuring treatment integrity, the mentalization-based group therapy adherence and quality scale. That is a scale that he developed and validated with his research group in order to measure treatment integrity. And during the keynote, he will also exemplify the method procedure to code treatment integrity on some transcripts of group therapy conducted in Norway. All these issues will be discussed by Sigmund by showing, how can I say, that virtuous circle between theory, research, and clinical practice that we know is a very important relationship, strongly supported in the field of psychotherapy research, and also highly encouraged by our society, the Society for Psychotherapy Research Italy area group, which has organized this webinar. At the end of the keynote, we'll have an open discussion. So at the end, participants can make questions to Sigmund by speaking directly with him, or if they prefer, by writing in the chat their questions in Italian or in English, and I will collect these questions and pose them to Sigmund. Then we'll have a brief break at about 11:45, and at 12 we will start the workshop. That will be a very practical experience where Sigmund will show how a first application, an application of the rating scale, of how we can use the rating scale for measuring treatment integrity in the transcripts of two group therapeutic sessions that were conducted in Italy and that were targeted to drug addicted patients. During the workshop, you can make all the questions you want. So we'll give time to participants to comment upon each intervention Sigmund will explain us. And then just some organizing aspect about the materials we will use. During the keynote, Sigmund will share on his screen his English version of the slide, but Italian participants received yesterday or 2 days ago, the Italian version of the slide. So if you prefer, you can read them directly. Instead, during the workshop, I will share and read for you the Italian transcripts, while English-speaking participants received yesterday the English version of this transcript, so they can read them directly if they prefer. As we said before, the keynote is video recorded, so you can see the video records of this keynote on the YouTube channel of SPR Italy area group. And just one recommendation for participants, please turn off your microphones, but you can leave your video on if you prefer. I think that now we can start the keynote. So I would spread the word to Sigmund and take the opportunity to thank him again for kindly accepting to attend this webinar. So Sigmund, if you are ready, we can start and you can share your slides on the screen.
Okay, you hear me, everybody? Hello, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks to the SPR Italy and to Giovanna, who have initiated this, and for the kind introduction by Vittorio. So let me now see if this functions. Yeah, you got the PowerPoint presentation now. Yes, good. So I'm going to explain the foundation then of mentalization-based group therapy, the theory and the clinical applications and research. I will start with some words about my background. And I grew up, so to speak, in a therapeutic community for general psychiatry in Oslo, Norway. It was on a time when therapeutic communities were possible in psychiatry, not only in the drug addiction field as now. So this community had all kinds of patients and acute admissions as well, and it was organized with a multiplicity of groups around the daily community meeting, which could assemble around 70 people. some of them quite ill, some of them were rolled in with their beds. Everybody should be part of the living community. It was intense, and it became more and more chaotic when the demand from the community increased for acute admissions, etc. So it was a perfect place to study group dynamics. And this was my doctoral dissertation, which you see here, group processes in therapeutic communities. And the aim was to make an empirical study of Bion's basic assumption theory, where the main methodology was what we labeled the group emotionality rating system. So already here you see my attraction to rating scales. And I rated about 36,000 verbal statements in groups for their emotional content. And by that time, I modified American method for assessing emotionality in groups, which you see from this publication. So the theory of the Bion, which he published in this book in 1961, Experiences in Groups and Other Papers, is probably the most cited volume in the history of group therapy. You see this picture of Bion. He is a bit stern here, and I think he was a large man, and probably also a bit stern. In any case, he is a kind of authority here, which radiates from this this photo. So what was this theory about? In Bion's words, it was he labeled the aspects of rationality, the attempts at thinking, at collective thinking, as the work group aspect of the group. And his basic assumption theory, you know, was meant to be a universal theory for groups in common, not only for therapy groups. So, but the dynamics then between the rational aspects and the emotional aspects, which threatened or undermined the group collective ways of thinking, was most clearly demonstrated and in therapeutic groups. And and the undermining forces in Bion's theory came from the so-called fight-flight group, hearing group, or dependency group. And he constructed this theory in the years 48 to 52 while working on the Northfield Military Hospital, and afterwards, but it was published then in 61. So all groups are affected by a tension between the work group and the different basic assumption groups of dependency, pairing, or fight-flight. And that has to do with that the individual tends to lose his or her individuality in groups, and when regressing tries to resolve the emotional tensions through valence with one of the three basic assumption groups, which means that the individual gives up his or her rationality and find a substitute or comfort in identifying with other fellow group members, whereby the group starts losing contact with social reality and succumbs to wishful collective thinking. I then asked the research question is this correct, so to speak, phenomenology, description of the most basic dynamics in groups, and are Bion's explanations for those phenomena valid? So I published a series of papers on this in Human Relations and in Acta Psychiatrica Scandinavica. This one tests the valence theory of Bion, which means that are there individual differences in people? So based on these differences, which are personality characteristics, are they attracted to the different basic assumptions which exist as potentials in groups? And in the largest, and I studied groups in different therapeutic communities, and in the largest and most influential one in Oslo, fight-flight groups dominated. So there was a rich material on fight-flight groups, and what kind of personalities which favored and was attracted to the valence of fight-flight and promoted it. And in this research, I could then demonstrate that particularly borderline patients had a strong valence for fight-flight. They fueled the fight-flight groups. And this is no surprise to modern therapists. But at that time, it was not that obvious. So it became evident that borderline patients in particular, but also other personality disorders and other poorly functioning patients, needed competent therapists in order to counteract the tendency to regression in groups. And there was no training in group therapy in Norway at that time, which also meant from a research perspective, that was an advantage, since you saw the phenomenology more in a more native form, so to speak. But in order then to counteract this, we then organized a training in group analysis in Norway in the style of Sigmund Karterud, not the style of Bion, which had survived at the Tavistock Clinic. And we founded the Norwegian Institute for Group Analysis in Oslo in '92. By that time, I was head of the department for personality disorders at Oslo University Hospital. And I organized smaller local units in all over Norway, which predominantly conducted long-term group psychotherapy in a research and clinical network. It was the Norwegian Research and Clinical Network for Personality Disorders. And this network exists also today, and consists of 21 different units, whereof about half have an MBT program. And this network has clinical conferences and cooperation. And the key with this network is that all of these units, they share their data to the common database, and they use the same type of assessment and outcome data. For the time being, we have approximately 12,000 cases with personality disorders, and about 3,000 cases with borderline. With this amount of data, we published a lot, of course, and also when we learned more and more about the personality disorders, we published a textbook something is wrong here now with my there. A textbook of personality psychiatry, which we regard as a foundation for psychotherapy with severe personality disorders, and a modern foundation of psychiatry as an alternative to medicalized reductionism, and very much informed by an evolutionary perspective. We experimented with different clinical approaches inspired by group analysis, object relations theory, and particularly self-psychology. And since the 1990s, we had some kind of collaboration with Anthony Bateman in London. And since the empirical results in London and theoretical system was persuasive, I decided to implement MBT at our department in 2008. In 2009, I founded the Norwegian Institute for Mentalizing together with my colleague Finn Skårderud. And during the years 2010 to 2012, I wrote in collaboration with Anthony 3 manuals for MBT, for individual therapy, for psychoeducational group, and for MBT group therapy, which was the last one, was then expanded into an English version in 2015. And in 2014, we published the first results from our treatment in Oslo, and they were very impressive with respect to a very low dropout rate. You know, the dropout rate was the big threat, not only to treatment for borderline patients earlier, but also for the possibility of conducting research. If you have a too high dropout rate, you can't really do research. So in this study, we had a dropout rate with 5%. And we had very high effect sizes, around 1.7, which is nearly the double of what is known as a good effect sizes for psychotherapy. And when we compared to ordinary psychodynamic treatment, MBT was found to be significantly better, and which is demonstrated here, very large differences in long-term course. The red lines are the psychodynamic patients. These are the MBT patients, and note that in this study, the number of patients is over 300. And this is symptom distress, and you note that the patients are very high on the GSI. Here are the cutoff line for normal variation in the population. versus pathology. And the MBT patients, they after 3 years, they cross the line towards and reach the normal distribution. And you see the same differences in interpersonal problems, in mistrust, and notably in global functioning, which is perhaps the most important measure. How well do patients function socially, and where we set the cutoff here at the GUF 60, which is the level where people that are higher than 60 people are partly able to function in occupation, in work, and in family relations to a degree. So in this study, and in this work, we realized that group therapy was the most difficult part of the program. And there are several reasons for that. And when we think about it, we find that from a group therapist perspective, it is counterintuitive to compose groups where all members have severe personality disorders. Every group therapist who wants the best for his or her group knows that it is preferable to take in patients as highly functioning as possible. That will benefit everybody, and that is actually documented by the research of William Piper and colleagues in Toronto. So it is completely counterintuitive. And that is, of course, because the high risk for fight, flight, and dependency and pseudo-group modes of group behavior is a threat to the group as a whole. And the probably most used way to counteract this tendency is to create highly structured groups, such as in dialectic behavioral treatment, and in cognitive therapy, or also in schema therapy. But the problem with highly structured groups is that they are mostly short-term, and they cannot work on attachment and maladaptive personal features or styles in the here and now. In MBT, we solve part of this problem, so to speak. We also have a highly structured group, a psychoeducational group, but that is parallel with a dynamic group. So the real challenge is how to conduct a dynamic group when all the members have severe personality disorders. So that is what is explained then in this publication from Oxford University Press, which also defines the treatment principles. There are a lot of clinical vignettes. It's the quality, the adherence and quality scales are explained there. And there also is a whole transcript of a group session which is rated in order to illustrate both the dynamics and the way to rate groups. So when we organized and constructed this model, we ended up, after, of course, much trials, experimentation, discussions. We had a Scandinavian group of colleagues who shared their videos, and Anthony was a kind of consultant, and we ended up with 19 principles for MBT group therapy, and I will shortly comment upon some of them. Some of them are principles which are relevant to all kind of group psychotherapy. For example, the first one about monitoring the group boundaries. That's nothing special mentalizing about that, but it is it has, as we will see also in the workshop after the pause, it has strong implications for the group dynamics when we analyze it from a mentalizing perspective. The second item of regulating the group phases in a special way is perhaps more specific for MBT-G. It explains and regulates, it explains the theory and the need of structure. And that when structuring a group session in order to counteract chaos and basic assumption functioning, the group therapist sets himself in a special position, and regulated by his theory, and it is especially relevant for the opening phase. The group is looked upon with an opening phase, a working phase, which also has to be modulated, and a terminating phase in order to close and compose and not end in a more chaotic manner. But it is the opening phase which is most crucial, and that has to do with the theoretical considerations of what personality disorders are all about, and especially borderline personality disorder, since it affects identity and self-cohesion. You can't expect that when you choose patients where everybody has trouble with self-cohesion and identity, that they will be able to establish by themselves group cohesion. Group cohesion is known to be the major predictor of outcome of group psychotherapy. And many of our patients, when they leave the group, they also shut down their thinking about their own experiences, and when they come to the group next time, and they are asked what's your opinion, what's your feeling about the last group meeting, and what's your thoughts about what has happened during the week. And many would say, I have no clue, I have no idea. I never think about the group. When I leave the group room, it's gone. So, in order then to secure some kind of group cohesion in MBT-G, the therapist is always starting the group and on time, and he should start in a special way. He should start by conveying his thoughts about the group from the previous session. And so he will start with the group in his mind. And he will convey that to the group in order to strengthen the group cohesion. And he should then say something about his thoughts about what happened, and more on the group as a whole level, but with reference to individuals, and with the pedagogic intention in order to strengthen the alliance for group therapy. Then he should take the initiative to the next item, which is here, which is initiating mentalizing turn-taking. And the question of mentalizing turn-taking, that is a measure in order to be able to work with individuals within the group in depth, and also to secure that the most dominant and chaotic borderline patients don't take all attention in the group. As you know, borderline patients, which often are in crisis, they are very appealing, of course, and they are needy. But the risk is that the most dominant and crisis-prone patients, they monopolize and take all attention, and more avoidant patients are then, so to speak, expelled to some corner of the group. So, in an ordinary session, there will be 3, 4, 5, sometimes 2, 3 mental turns with designated patients. The main task then of the therapist is to avoid individual psychotherapy in group. So the main point is to engage the group members in mentalizing the concern of the individual. And the main initial task of the therapist is to assist the group in finding a scene, finding a possible narrative which can be explored. Because you can't explore generalities, you can't explore opinions about the world, opinions about family members, opinions about things. You have to explore scenes, and it has to be concretized. And the next item is about what every group therapists know very well, is that there are a lot of enactments in groups, and the therapist should identify and and help the group to mentalize events in the group, what's going on in the here and now. And devoted group therapists, of course, feel that as the most that has a priority, because it is fresh, it is live, it happens here and now, it's full of transference, and if you succeed in helping the group to mentalize interpersonal tensions in the here and now and resolve those conflicts, you do a job in enhancing their mentalizing capacity. Then there is an item for care for the group and its members. The ideal role here is, or the metaphor you can say, is the group leader, therapist as a benign family father for a family group who cares about his family as a whole and cares about its members and stops destructive acting out in the group. And to do that, he has to practice authority. And under that item, we also place interventions of a more pedagogical character, which is interventions like strong emotions. Yeah, as you all know, strong emotions have a tendency to make it difficult to think. So therefore, it is important for us all in this group to try to cope with these strong emotions. That is not an interpretation. It's a kind of pedagogical intervention, and it's the type of interventions who reflect the therapist's theory of how the mind works. The next item is assisting the group in discussions of group as a whole relevant themes that has to do with norms, establishing norms in the group, why is it important to come to the group regularly, to come precisely, to be prepared, to speak to each other in a certain way, etc. And the main issue here is, of course, to help to get the group members internalize those kind of values, to make them so they own them. So it is not the project of the therapist when the group progresses, but it is owned by the group members. And then there is efficient and modeling cooperation with the co-therapist. The ideal is that the co-therapists in MBT-G, they speak to each other openly and directly in the group, instead of coming with the interpretations on the group, what's going on in the group as a whole. And and they are modeling, so if one of the group therapists feel lost or dizzy or is overwhelmed by his counter-transference, can't think constructively any longer, he should tell the co-therapist in the group that co-therapist, I'm lost. I don't know what's going on. It's what about you? Do you have any idea of what's going on here, or what we should say? So there are the following 10 items, which are adjusted for the group format from the individual MBT manual. It's the general attitude of the therapist, engaged, interest, warm. And then there is the most important general attitude. It's the explorative, not knowing stance of the therapist. The curious therapist who is curious about the mind and manage to recruit the group as a whole in order to explore the mind of the individual and the mentality of the group. Then there is a challenging and warranted beliefs, like when they approach and group members, if group members start to talk in a devaluating manner of something, all people from Milano are arrogant. It's that kind of individual individual statements and opinions with a low degree of reflective functioning, which easily can become operative on a collective mode. Then it is regulating arousal, which is very important in groups. Emotions are contagious, and when the emotions are too high, the therapist should be active in stopping and taking the charge. And when the emotional temperature is too low, the therapist should get it hotter. And the best way to get it hotter is to say something about the here and now and emotions. And then there is acknowledging good mentalizing. Borderline patients are confused as to what are good versus bad mentalizing, what are adaptive and what is maladaptive. And that should be stated clearly, and it should also be discussed how it feels like having another kind of mental operation when people develop. Then it is the task of dealing with the pretend mode, which we will which we'll discuss much more in the workshop part. The tendency to mere talk and talking in a way which seems like having a kind of mentalizing with psychological and sociological cliches, but in a detached manner. And then it is dealing with psychic equivalence, which is, by the way, easier in some way to do in groups than in individual therapy, because the therapist can have the group as a whole to play on, so it's possible to then to halt, to stop a patient, and then ask the group about different opinions, so that the individual who is more lost in psychic equivalence can get a pause, can calm down, and possibly being open for relevant comments from a different perspective of other group members. Then, of course, it is a heavy focus on emotions, both intrapsychic with respect to affect consciousness with respect to in interpersonal encounters, and with respect to the emotions, the more or less hidden emotions in the here and now. And then there is the stopping, and where the therapist takes charge of what's going on and goes back to crucial events. And then it's the focus on what's going on between patients and therapists in a more in transference and counter-transference terms. So how do we train group therapists in this mode? In Norway, we presuppose an introductory course in MBT, 3 days. It is similar all over Scandinavia and the same as in Anna Freud Center in London. Thereafter, we have a 10-month course with 8 or 10 seminar days consisting of lectures and theory, role-playing. The participants, the course which I have has 12 participants, and they role play and change they role play a dynamic group for about 1 hour, and I'm outside the circle, and we are discussing what's going on, the dynamics and the interventions, and it's very, very interesting, and they rotate in the role as therapists, and all participants need to have an ongoing MBT group, which is video recorded, and it's discussed on the course. And in Norway we have 4 or 5 trainers, and they are also certified group analysts. So there is a close connection here between MBT and MBT-G and group analysis. And it's organized either by the Institute for Mentalization or the Institute for Group Analysis in Oslo. So what are the similarities and differences with psychodynamic group therapies? The similarities is that we aim at developing and working through of a safe, engaged, and exploratory group culture, pendulating between there and then and here and now. That is not. I mean, most psychodynamic groups do that. The differences is concerning the group composition. Here, all patients are in the borderline range in the wide sense. It's borderline with different inclinations. It's borderline with antisocial features, with paranoid features, with schizotypal features, or more avoidant and more narcissistic. And so MBT-G is time limited for the individual, not for the group. The group is slow open. In Norway, the time limitation is between 2 and 3 years. MBT-G is a conjoint therapy. It's group and individual, and with different therapists. The aim, task, and role is better defined in MBT-G. MBT-G is not free associative. It structures the group. It has interpersonal events as a privileged focus. Therapists are more active in a specified way and more pedagogic. MBT-G is less tolerant of turbulence and chaos. Therapists do less group as a whole and individual interpretations. And therapists in MBT-G are more transparent. So then we come to the question of treatment integrity. So how do we decide whether the therapists which we train do MBT group therapy? How do we assure that they work on model? And it's important for training, learning, but it's most important, of course, for psychotherapy research, which if we claim that a certain mode of psychotherapy has such and such effect, how do we ascertain that the special branch of therapy actually is performed? And in order to do that, we have trained, we have constructed this MBT group assessment and quality scale, and we have trained raters, and we have measured their reliability. And rating groups are more difficult than rating individuals. And it's weaker tradition for it, and it's a rather exhausting procedure, because we have to rate, we face 10 persons for 1.5 hours. And how do we train our raters? They are experienced MBT group therapists. They are approved raters of individual MBT. They have good knowledge, or we have discussions of the manual, of course, of the rating procedures. They start with rating one group transcript, then one video session with the feedback and discussion, and then we have a reliability test. And when we did this formal study, we had 16 sessions with 8 therapists, 2 sessions each, and 5 raters. So it was designed in order to have a variability with respect to type of groups, different therapists, different sessions, and different raters. So the challenge then is to try to disentangle the variance components and their influence on the reliability. But and overall, we had a very high reliability, surprisingly, in my opinion, when it comes to the overall adherence and overall quality, which is beyond 0.90 in reliability statistics. And this is the publication on this study. It was analyzed by generalizability study for those of you who like advanced statistics. And this rating scale is used by the Norwegian MBT Quality Laboratory. And that is a laboratory sponsored by the regional health authorities in southern Norway as a means for quality assurance in psychiatry, and by assisting to implement MBT teams. It is organized in order to help MBT teams to be organized all around the country. And it's is organized under the Norwegian National Competence Services for Personality Psychiatry since 2013. And the therapists, they send the video recording of the group session to the laboratory, and they receive feedback on the overall adherence and quality. They receive their intervention profile, what kind of interventions do they do more or less of, and they receive a written 1.5 pages clinical comment on the group, the process, and the therapist intervention. And then we have MBT research. It's with the combination of this manualized form of treatment and with the accompanying adherence and quality rating scale, it is possible to do types of research. And what we see is that there, of course, is a common pitfall here, that therapists are tending to do individual therapy in the group and not psychotherapy through the group process. That is a tendency in all psychodynamic groups, but not so much in group analysis. And it comes as a consequence of when the therapist takes a more authority position, that it's tempting for the therapist also to engage him herself more in an individual way. So that is a constant thing which we are trying to avoid and counteract in the training, to not to do individual therapy in group. And what we see is that that therapists, they have problems with the structure in where some has neglect structure, others have too much structure. And in the workshop part, we will see the difference between a group session which is structured and a group session which starts out with low structure, and which also is a reflection that therapists have difficulties with their own authority. How to be an authoritative group therapist and not an authoritarian and not a laissez-faire. Then we have seen groups where therapists overplay the not knowing stance, which especially young therapists seem to do. That it is as if they don't know anything about groups or individual psychodynamics, and they are exploring and exploring and exploring and exploring, and in ways which can enhance chaos. Then we have done a study where we find that increase in reflective functioning in groups seem to be linked to a more challenging therapist attitude and not to a supportive stance. We have not yet done that kind of research which links increase in reflective functioning during session with outcome. But that has been done in a Swedish study with individual MBT, which seems then to support the theory that the increase in reflective functioning and which legitimize that as the main target area, and that is a mechanism, sort of mechanism of change concerning a general outcome. Then we have published a study on what characterizes high quality MBT group therapy. What characterizes the therapist and what characterizes the group dynamics. We have also did a study of MBT processes in the treatment of female borderline drug addicts who had a remarkable high good outcome, and they were interviewed with respect to their experiences from the group part of the treatment. And we have done something on the use of case formulations in group therapy, and we have this study with Giovanna on mentalizing underachievement in group counseling, and also a more theoretical study on the significance of personality and personality theory, and the theory of the group matrix in a Foulkesian sense, where the main point is that the question of personality and personality structure and personality differences is a bit underdeveloped in regarding the theory of group matrix. So here is the scheme for rating scale, and so when we come to the workshop, we will that's what we have used, and when we rate groups, the adherence is rated as yes or no for each intervention. Each intervention which the therapist come with either get or don't get a rating of adherence, and one intervention can receive several adherence ratings. So if I say that it's I think it's important for us in the group that we find out a bit more what was the emotions which member Alberto was coping with when he met when he quarreled with his girlfriend last week, and to find out more about it and to help Alberto then to understand and integrate it. It's that's an intervention which then in the A4, engaging group members in mentalizing events, external, and it is have an affect focus. So it will be rated with A4 and A17. So the overall rating of MBT adherence is on the 1 to 7 Likert scale. With 1 is very low, 7 is excellent, couldn't be better. And the overall adherence is decided on number of MBT interventions and their breadth and coherence. And the quality here, it is competence, but we prefer quality. Quality is rated on each intervention is then rated for adherence and possibly for quality if you have time. But when you rate a group, it is going very rapidly. So quality is rated for each item when the group is finished. And then it is rated according to qualifiers on a 1.1 to 7 Likert scale. We have examples of what is poor or low quality, and examples of what is high quality. So every item then got a quality rating down here, and then this is compiled to an overall rating. So that is the rating scale. So perhaps Giovanna, should we stop there and take open for question and discussion?
Yes, we open.
Shall I go then out of the sharing?
Yes. Okay.
So then we are back.
Now. Okay, in the slide there are also some first examples on some transcripts, but of course participants can read them on their copy of slides. Okay, now we can start with our open discussion. So if participants want to make questions to Sigmund, they can do now. We have about 20-25 minutes to discuss with him upon this very interesting presentation. You can ask directly with him, or you can write in the chat if you prefer. Okay, maybe meanwhile the questions arrive, I can ask you something, because I have some curiosity, Sigmund, about what you said in your keynotes. The first curiosity was if has ever been explored an association between therapists' interventions and balance for a specific basic assumptions, according to the Bion's conceptualization.
No, it has not. And I think it's perhaps in our days it is more obvious that borderline patients they go for fight flight, and avoidant patients and more dependent characters they go for more dependency groups. But let me add then that Bion's theory about the contradiction or the tension between then rationality and the three basic assumptions. The validity of that theory is rather dubious, and it is linked, I think, to Bion having a flawed theory of emotions. He had the theory of drives and aggression and submission, when I rated groups for emotionality, and I should rate the fight-flight group. Of course, the first challenge I had was to say, okay, you should rate fight-flight, but fight-flight, fight is different from flight.
Yes.
So the very conception that there is something which can be labeled fight-flight, you have to make an empirical study of it, and you have to separate verbal statements that convey some kind of anger or aggression from verbal statements that that signal some kind of flight. And then it become obvious when you look at it that sometimes they go like this, sometimes they are different. So you obviously have a fight group and a different flight group, and the flight group is related to the basic, the primary emotion of fear. And the reason for fight-flight group is that that strong aggression often is combined with fear. But surely you have definite fear, pure flight groups, and the more avoidant, dependent patients, of course, go in that direction. And also borderline patients with a high inclination for avoidance and dependency, while borderline patients with more antisocial features and narcissistic features, they go in the more fight mode. And I think that the basic assumption theory has to be reformulated according to the theory of the primary emotions. So you have groups which are dominated by aggression, yes, dominated by fear, yes, dominated by sexuality, yes, dominated by submission within the system of care and separation anxiety. And you have groups which only which are very funny. So you have very funny groups which are dominated by play. That's and all these emotions can of course be mixed, and they all tend then, if they're strong enough, to undermine the collective thinking in the group.
Okay, thank you, Sigmund. There are some questions in chat. The first, by Federica Parlato, is: which is the role of the interpretation in MBT-G, and which type of interpretation is more helpful to provide in MBT-G?
Also, so what is the role of what kind of interpretation?
Yes, if interpretation is a type of intervention provided by an MBT-G therapist, and if yes, which type of interpretation based on defenses, on conflicts, on transference?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is, and I think it's a controversial issue. While when it comes to interpretation, the tradition, in the classical MBT format, the interpretations in an ordinary sense is very seldom. It's very, and it's very seldom on. It is almost non-existent in on a group as a whole level. Therapist never says that I think there is tension in the group today, and I think it has to do with the latent with the disappointment and rage towards me, which might be and transference interpretations on that level. No, but you should MBT group therapy is a very flexible format, and the very structured way which I explained and which is contained in the manual, it is recommended for poorly functioning patients. The better functioning patients and the better functioning the group as a whole are, the less rigid should the therapist be, and also perhaps more interpretative with his interventions. So it's a bit of a question of the stage of development of the group as a whole, and the development of the individual. It's so when in my private practice, I have a group for highly functioning patients, actually psychologists and doctors, and there I come with and I conduct that group after integrated group analytic mentalizing principles. In that kind of group, I come with interpretations both on the group as a whole and concerning the individual. But for borderline patients, it is the main interventions are exploratory and validating, and supportive for the group as a whole. It's but challenging on unwarranted beliefs, and coping with the psychic equivalence in a way more through regulation of affects than through interpretations. But there were several comments here.
Yes. Okay. The next question is by Anna Cannata. Is being a group analyst a fundamental prerequisite to train MBT group therapists? If yes, why? Thanks a lot.
once more, the requisite is.
Yes, because you said before that MBT-G psychotherapists, young psychotherapists, are trained by supervisor who have a previous training in group analysis.
Yeah.
So the colleague asked if, from your perspective, this is a fundamental prerequisite or not.
No, it is not
you
fundamental.
need to have a group analytic training before
it is not fundamental. But and you know, it's a bit controversies about that. Anthony Bateman don't have group analytic training, and Anthony is more opposed to group analysis than I am. I am a group analyst by training, and I am on good terms with the group analytic community. Anthony is a bit but in training you have when I train at the Institute for Mentalization, there we take in therapists who don't have basic group psychotherapy training. So that means that I also have to rapidly take care of some basics. When we train at the Institute of Group Analysis, the participants, they have 2 or 3 years ordinary psychodynamic group analytic training experience. So then they know all the basic stuff. Then they have to relearn some of their old habits and to adopt the more mentalizing principles. What is best is I don't know, but since we take in therapists directly to group training, we get therapists from all over the country, from all different sorts of treatment facilities, and so the treatment is spread more rapidly, but perhaps on the cost of some kind of quality. But yeah. Okay. So, but if there was a therapist who has a long experience in MBT and is a good therapist, but don't have group analytic training, I could have possibly taken that person into a training team. So it is not fundamental.
Okay, thank you. Another question is by Simona Cervo. I would like to know something about the use of MBT-G with adolescents.
Yes. How should I say that? It is, let's say that it is a work in progress. So I don't know if you know this study from Denmark, but we set up a randomized trial in Denmark, in Roskilde, where we randomized those adolescents to MBT group therapy and versus treatment as usual. And and they were between, the participants were, I think, between 15 and 18. And many of them were very poorly functioning. And of course, a lot of school problems, family problems, adoption, child institutions, etc. And they received 1 year of MBT group therapy, and I tried to train the therapists. So I went down to Denmark, and we looked at videos and doing this nearly the same way as we're doing in Oslo. And when we studied the outcome, it was very disappointing because we didn't find any difference between the youth in MBT groups versus treatment as usual. But we learned a lot of this study, and we learned a lot about the design. And so I was not responsible for the design, but the design was very little individual therapy. I mean, MBT with borderline patients is a conjoint treatment. You have to have individual psychotherapy assisting. And those adolescents, they did not have that. They had some few individual sessions, and they had some few sessions with the family, with the parents. So I think that the design which was set up was unrealistic. Okay. But nevertheless, it was an experience which I think the therapist learned a lot about it, and on how to set up a program which is more useful and which is necessary in order to have real personality development. And yeah, okay.
Okay, we have enough time for another question by Maria Rosaria di Natale. Hi, very interesting presentation. I have a question. I imagine that there is a difference in inviting group members to participate more actively in the session, and what you mean with item A3 for initiating and fulfilling turn-taking. How can we differentiate a simple invitation in participating from a more structured turn-taking? Thanks.
I don't know if I understood the question correctly, but initiating turn-taking means that the therapist organizes the group in a certain way, and so what was the question once more? So
I think that the colleague wants to know if there is a difference in how much is structured the turn-taking. So she wants, maybe she wants to say,
okay, how much is the turn-taking?
The turn-taking, because
the turn-taking is structured in a way that let's say, okay, after the opening phase, we say, okay, Giovanna, now it's your turn. So how is your feelings concerned with organizing this webinar. Shall we try to explore that, Giovanna? And when Giovanna then starts to talk about that, people comment about it. And in groups, of course, you have, if then some other participant, let's say Gordon, he says, I can sympathize with you, Giovanna, because I organized a seminar which was terrible in Scotland last year. And then he starts to talk about his difficulties in Scotland and how difficult that was, and about his mother and the father and the wife. And so he steals, so to speak, the scene from you. And then Maria Francesca can say, oh, that reminds me about a seminar in Sicilia. And you know, the Sicilians, they are terrible people, and and ordinarily, when the group is associating in this way, the therapist will let it go, and will see where does this go in, and what will be the common emotional denominator here. But in MBT group, I would say, okay, Gordon, nice to hear about your experiences in Scotland, but can we go back to Giovanna? Because she wanted really to explore in depth what this meant for her. So perhaps we can take your experiences later on, or next session, or so that means to protect the protagonist, and so you are not. So there will not be another group member who has a more juicy story, a more sexy story, or a more dramatic story, who steals and you are then overridden, and which will often be the case when you have groups composed of people with strong emotions, with strong experiences, strong affects, and which also are dominant.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. Okay, there is another question, I think. Maybe, yes, we have 2 minutes. There is a comment by Gordon about the need to incorporate MBT in group analytic training. Just a comment, yes, it's not a question. And the last question, then we'll have the break, is how do MBT-G therapists collaborate with the individual therapist?
Good question. Yep, Gordon.
Did you?
Sorry, I was going to make a comment, but there's a question, so I'm
sorry.
Aside.
I thought it was a comment.
Well, no, I had a comment, but about the interpretations actually that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're familiar with a research that David Mallon did about the Tavistock groups.
Yes, I know.
It's a really great paper, and it really makes you think about the purpose of interpretations in groups, because they followed up many people who've been in the Tavistock groups for many years, and the results were quite appalling. They said that people found it very, very traumatic. They found it a sort of dehumanizing experience. And in actual fact, it really would make you think of, and the conclusion was, why would anybody do groups like this?
Yes.
And that was in 1979. Yeah. But I think it really does illustrate the work that you've done, Sigmund, and others around mentalizing, that actually that a mentalized group experience actually, certainly for people with low reflective function, is well, certainly less harmful, but probably much better. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, I fully agree.
And trans-theoretically, I mean, there are two Steiner Lawrenson's work for short-term groups and Krista Sandahl's work in Sweden on short-term psychodynamic groups are both actually stressing in their theoretical models of groups, the more lower functioning, the more the group becomes a mentalizing group. And they're incorporating that in new transdiagnostic sort of models as well.
Yes, I agree to that too, yes.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask a question, just 1 minute?
Yes, there was another question before, Raffaella, just a moment before you. How do the, no, I've already said this question maybe. How do MBT therapists collaborate with individual therapists?
Yeah. That is a very good question. It's and I think that the crucial element here is sharing video. So I a couple of days ago, I'm supervising an MBT team in Sweden. And a couple of days ago, we had a very nice supervising session about an event in the group between the two participants. And then we started we saw the individual session with one of them. Then we saw a tape recording of the group. And then we saw an individual session of the other patient. And by sharing this information and understanding and what was going on, and all misunderstandings and what was going on between the sessions, etc., it was possible to reach some kind of common agreement among with the members of the whole team, and that was the incident was followed by a typical acting out, and it was a question of the breaking of the alliance. It was a therapeutic rupture. It had all qualities and one of the patients wanted to quit treatment, and she was a borderline with narcissistic features, and so, and it was a criminal, a gang of gangsters involved here, and it was a very dramatic story, which really showed the necessity of the whole team coming together and look at the material from different angles. And I think so the crucial part, I think, is sharing videos.
Okay, just really the last question, Raffaella, please, if you want.
Thank you.
To make the last question.
I was curious to know if there's an association between basic assumption and members' non-mentalizing modes.
Yes, yes, it is. We would say that when participating, when being engaged and by the group and to participant in a basic assumption mode, the individual is regressed to a lower level of reflective functioning, and that is in a fight-flight group. You become a member of some kind of collective projective identification, and you lose your critical ability. And the same is in being when you're sucked into a dependency group you feel you're part of the helplessness, you're de-skilled, you lose your critical ability, etc. Or if you're part of a peering group which plays on illusions of future happiness and sexual enjoyment, and things which will solve all problems in the world. So, all being a member of that kind of group functioning is a sign of regressing to a more lower reflective functioning. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sigmund. Now we will have a brief break. It's a 5 to 12. Maybe we can see here at 10 past 12, just a quarter of hour to make a brief break, a coffee, and we will start the workshop. So at 10 past 12. Okay.
10 past 12. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. See you later.